Hello and welcome. My name is Joe Furia, and I'm Executive Director of World Forestry Center, a nonprofit working at the intersection of people and forests for over 50 years. At World Forest Center, we believe that how we manage forests affects everyone, and that the forestry issues are fundamentally social issues. Today's topic is no exception. Affordable housing is one of the most urgent challenges facing our society today. That is why we're excited and humbled to bring to you this discussion on innovative timber construction and how it can play a significant role, in addressing affordable housing. We're joined today by our moderator, Greg Wolf. Greg is the Executive Director of Oregon iSector, an organization focused on facilitating public-private civic partnerships to address crucial issues facing Oregon. Welcome, Greg.
Welcome, Joe. Thank you for inviting me.
What are we covering today?
Well, we want to address this problem of affordable housing across the country. It is a critical need now. Many states are actually facing major housing deficits that they're trying to figure out how to address. And what the opportunity today is to look at how mass timber and modular housing can really be utilized and how we can really develop those systems and the support systems around them to make sure that they actually can contribute to addressing these housing deficits that are really a major problem for all states in the United States.
It's great to have you. I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and get this discussion underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And thanks to the World Forestry Center for organizing this program. We really do have an all-star panel that is here today that are working at a variety of stages in creating this new and emerging sector. First, Sebastian Popp is the technical director at KLH's office in the US, where he puts his degrees in timber engineering, business administration, and project management to good use. Together with the great team, Sebastian has tackled small to large and complex mass timber jobs. His career started with the world's first 8-story CLT house, and 16 years later, his team accomplished the world's first 26-story mass timber structure. Tamara Kennedy Hill is the Director of Economic Development at Port of Portland and partners with senior leadership and external partners to advance shared prosperity for historically marginalized communities. She also serves on the Black United Fund of Oregon and Greater Portland Economic Development District boards. Next is Ernesto Fonseca, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Hacienda, an Oregon Community Development Corporation and social enterprise that advances the livability, health, and economic progress of underserved communities in the Pacific Northwest. Ernesto has dedicated the last 16 years of his career to the development of high-quality, affordable housing and social issues in Mexico and the United States. And finally, Nick Milestone is the current Director of Projects for Mercer Mass Timber and Chairman of the Timber Research and Development Association in the UK. He's a veteran of the European and United Kingdom mass timber markets, and prior to joining Mercer, Nick held positions with the U.S. Softwood Lumber Board, Katerra Incorporated, and SIGMAT, developing building systems in mass timber, structural steel, and load-bearing light gauge steel structures. Welcome to each of you, and thank you for being part of this excellent panel today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ernesto, who's going to take us through overcoming the barriers to creating affordable housing, focusing on the 5 L's that he'll tell you about, as well as a little bit about Hacienda and his approach to this problem. Ernesto?
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you very much, everybody, for having us here today and talk a little bit about housing. Again, my name is Ernesto Fonseca. I am the Chief Executive of Hacienda CDC, a social organization in the Pacific Northwest. We are dedicated to developing affordable housing across the state and growing. And we also provide services because we strongly believe that while housing is a wonderful place for us to recharge, live, shelter, is not enough. And Tamara, my partner, will be talking a little bit more about economic development. But we join forces precisely because of that reason. housing and economic development are two really fundamental pieces for us to be able to uplift and really give a chance to our communities to succeed if we can see them succeed, which I believe that should be the case, and we're working on it. So affordable housing, such a simple, sentence to say and such a complicated enterprise to do. Affordable housing is nothing else, in simple words, than housing that is subsidized with different sources that come from government primarily. In some cases, the private sector also invests in affordable housing in terms of a direct subsidy for us to be able to provide, more affordable rents for lower income families that are, all the way in the bottom of the economy or to the middle of it. So that means that, families that earn in between 0 to 60% of the area median income will be our primary clients, to help them, get a house that is stable, where they can feel safe, where they can feel that they can actually start, rebuilding their lives in a way that is positive. But it's not so simple to do this housing. Just because it is affordable housing doesn't mean that it's cheaper housing in terms of development and construction. In fact, affordable housing is much more expensive, and some people, question as to why is this more expensive. There are different reasons, but one of them is that we have to build housing that is much more durable, because this housing is going to have transitional residents in some cases, and in some other cases, these houses are submitted to a little extra work than traditional housing. So we have to make sure that our investments are solid, so we include really high quality materials and equipment to make this happen. So with that said, cost will become an issue to this housing and process and all of that. So let's start with the 5 L's that Greg was mentioning. One of the primary barriers that we will find in developing affordable housing is the lack of financing, the lack of lending. Lending is very much regulated by the U.S. federal government through the U.S. Department of Housing and Treasury departments through something that is called the low-income housing tax credits. All of that sounds really fun, but it is a limited resource that is competitive in order for us to deliver affordable housing. It is a really long process, which takes us to the next L. The next L is the lack of laws that really enable us to expedite a process that can be efficient and sufficient at the same time. So we have all of these laws that are imposing regulations in terms of zoning. I do believe in zoning, but I also believe in acting fast, when emergencies such as this one are facing our community in ways that we have never seen before. So between lending and zoning laws, we find ourselves into a pickle with little resources, a very long process that can take up to 6 months for us to even be awarded a fund for us to do affordable housing, and then develop a project which can take up to 2 years. When everything is said and done in these houses, we're looking into a 3 to 5 year period, between the time we started thinking about and developing, designing, pre-developing, assembling the financing, and then having a turnkey project, up to 5 years. That kind of timeline, is really restrictive for us to be able to provide housing quickly, and especially during emergencies. The other L that I want to talk to you a little bit about is the labor. The lack of labor in this country is just unprecedented. We have a lot of immigration, and immigrants are not coming to the United States, specifically during the pandemic. There were a lot of restrictions. We had a lot of employees that took a break and started reassessing their desires as to what they want to do professionally. All of those factors and more have created a perfect storm of really short supply of qualified labor for us to do construction, which, again, is not only the lack of labor that creates an issue, it's the lack of labor that increases cost at the same time. So we have labor, we have laws, and we have lending so far. These three elements are elements that are for the most part one of the three most significant of the 5 L's that I want to discuss with you. The other ones are basically lumber and lots. So the lack of land is a very serious issue in some cases, not in every case. And I want to be very specific on that one because we have, states and cities like Houston, states like Texas, and cities like Houston, cities like Dallas, where land zoning is not as restrictive as it is in the Northwest. While there are many benefits, for us to welcome and try to protect our natural resources and try to contain, different densities in different locations in urban environments, all of that is pretty good. But when that is starting to impede our ability to develop housing of any type, from low-income housing to middle-income housing and beyond, that creates another significant barrier for us to move fast and to get, affordable land altogether. So the lack of land is a very significant issue, but it's very situational depending on where you are. And finally, one of the biggest issues that we have during the pandemic was the lack of lumber. Lumber became, it is a commodity, but it became even more so of a commodity. We watch, the price of lumber and production every single day. As we develop thousands of housing units every year, our purchasing power is pretty large. Therefore, we have to make sure that we're watching, where this lumber is being produced, when this lumber is being delivered or is going to be available. And we tend to buy significant amounts of lumber every single year for us to make sure that we bring this to the front. And we bank, we basically do lumber banking for each one of our projects. And that is something that we definitely want to continue doing, but it's also something that not every single developer has the ability to do. So if you are the last to purchase lumber, you will find yourself into a difficult situation because you will be competing with these very large developers that are absorbing a lot of these consumable, and you will have to pay premium prices. The delivery of the traditional affordable housing models that we have are between 3 years and 5 years. That is, in my view, less than acceptable. Now, if we go into the world of manufactured housing, modular housing, mass timber housing, with that said, mass timber, at least for the Pacific Northwest, is a beloved industry that has a lot of history in this part of the country. So we are trying to not necessarily reinvent the wheel, but make that wheel even better by utilizing a small diameter timber for us to subtract veneer and then create mass plywood. Mass plywood, has the advantage that we are not utilizing big logs. We don't have to trim or cut or log, our forest in a irresponsible way. But instead, we're taking this small timber that, in fact, helps the forest to be more healthy, to be healthier, to be less prone to fires and so on and so forth. And we're creating that veneer. That technology needs to be streamlined in the United States. It is incredible that bringing a panel from Europe is cheaper than producing it here. So we are a little bit behind, the curve to do this kind of work, but it's something that I'm so looking forward for us to really explore even further. Hacienda and our dear friends at the Port of Portland, we're developing right now some prototypes that will be completed by the end of this year and beginning of next. So I am hoping that we will be welcoming a lot of people to see what we came up with. And that type of housing, what I was going to say in terms of delivery, is something that if it is mass produced, it can be delivered within a couple of weeks. It can be delivered within a couple of weeks because those 2 weeks, even though the unit's already completed, will include just the site preparation, foundations, electric, sewer, and water, and that's all. We're calling it the plug-in house, the cell phone house. So the house will be complete as it is, with appliances, with absolutely everything. We come and sit in your property, and you have a house that all you have to do is plug it in. So there is some work there, but no more than 2 weeks. So I see a lot of future, for this type of modular manufactured housing, and especially utilizing mass timber, which can re-energize and catalyze the rebirth of the timber industry in the Northwest. So it's a win-win situation that will include a lot of economic development opportunities, including workforce development. And with that said, I want to conclude my remarks saying thank you to all. And Tamara, I will like to pass that to you, but I will give it back to Greg so he can tell us what is next.
Okay. Thanks, Ernesto. And again, our focus today is on wood products and how innovative developments in materials like mass timber and in modular housing may have the potential to support more affordable housing and community development opportunities throughout the country. So now we're going to hear about some featured projects that draw on the expertise and the experience of our panelists. And let's start with Tamara. Tamara, can you give us some information and an overview of the Terminal 2 project and the specific strategies that are aiming to address a wide range of the 5L issues that Ernesto mentioned, such as workforce development opportunities for BIPOC communities?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Greg. And again, Ernesto, thank you so much for the context. I just want to provide a really brief connection of who the Port of Portland is and why we're so interested in this project and connected to Terminal 2. The Port of Portland, in addition to having Portland International Airport, we also have two general aviation airports, 4 active marine terminals, and 5 industrial parks. We're actually the largest owner of industrial land in the state of Oregon. But we do know, as Ernesto mentioned, the land part, one of those L's, is a factor that is a challenge within our region because we are running out of really large lots to be able to develop, in particular to connect with advanced manufacturing and then also the needs of the workforce that we have in our region. So Terminal 2 is a former marine terminal that's no longer in active use. And interestingly enough, it was a marine terminal that used to ship forest products to the world. And so now the vision is to repurpose this project, this site that's over 50 acres, to have it be a mass timber innovation factory site and hub that will provide opportunities for, I think, addressing some of the other L pain points that Ernesto mentioned around supply, development, looking at creating quality jobs for underrepresented communities, and then also ensuring that as we make this understanding and connection of the large and important need we have for addressing affordable housing in our region, Ernesto highlighted some of the pain points we have, but we also know in the West Coast, in particular in our area, we have been, I think we have over 30 to 40,000 housing units under production per year, and that's not even just including just opportunities for middle income housing, but also for everybody. And so as you can see, how that can exacerbate the tension points of opportunities, in particular for those who have not been able to benefit. The Terminal 2 project really kind of came about as this intersection of really understanding how can we leverage one of our underutilized assets to provide community benefit and good. How do we think about resilience for our region? How do we think about creating quality jobs and generational wealth? And then really looking at the opportunity addressing much needed housing and also supporting safer, more resilient forests. Kind of a first in a really long time, created this new $1 billion national challenge that challenged the whole nation to, from a regional and grassroots effort, to do a kind of build back better for our regions. The Oregon Mass Timber Coalition, which is comprised of the Port of Portland, Department of Land Conservation, Department of Forestry, the Tallwood Design Institute, which is Oregon State University and U of O. And we wanted to come together to really address the pain points and the gaps from the fire impacted communities, but also really address our housing crisis. And so by responding to this national challenge, it really gave us a catalyst to come together, and then having the site at Terminal 2 was really a great place for this project to really manifest. We were successful on phase 1. We were winning one of 60 out of 529 applications. We were narrowed down. And then of the final phase 2, which was just announced in September of 2022, we were one of the finalists of 21 applications of the 529 across the nation, which created $41.4 million of federal dollars infused around into the state, into the region, to focus on mass timber innovation and housing production. So that's what the vision is at Terminal 2. We're really excited to work and partner with Hacienda CDC. Ernesto's team is really focusing on the prototyping and testing to ensure that this opportunity of using this innovation, using modular that can create more speed of housing production to address the housing gap need, but also really connect this holistic virtuous cycle from sustainable forest practices, supporting rural jobs, and then supporting advanced manufacturing and opportunities for communities of color within the urban areas to really kind of change opportunities and growth and create that pipeline for the future. So it's a really exciting project that we're just getting kicked off.
Thank you so much, Tamara. Really appreciate that. And now we're going to hear from our European partners. Sebastian and Nick, given your long experience, can you give us some lessons learned from your experience in affordable housing projects using innovative timber products in Europe? Let's start with Nick.
Thank you, Greg. And it was really good about picking up on the 5 Ls. I think, we can echo that sentiment. I'm sure Sebastian will agree with me. The use of mass engineered timber, it's applicable for the right building typology in the right place. So if we take North America loves wood in both single family and multifamily, and designing quite happily up to 5 stories. It's when you start going above 5 stories, that's when it becomes more challenging. Naturally, concrete kicks into place. But one of the L's you mentioned was the lack of labour, and that is very representative. When there is a lack of labour, on-site construction can become very expensive, and that's where the inflection point comes into more off-site driven solutions, which can be manufactured as either 2D flat pack or 3D volumetric solutions using mass timber because it's lightweight and is more adaptable. And therefore we can go to many stories now, not just above 5 stories, and not just limit ourselves at 18 stories. We're now seeing projects in California where we're starting to see 22 stories of a structural steel frame, CLT, floor plates and prefabricated facade systems, similar to UBC, but using structural steel as the primary, but still using mass timber. And there's more volumes in the floors than there are in the walls. So the reason why mass timber is the material of choice is A, because we're starting to be more competitive, and it's about speed of construction. So when you are limited by the lack of laws, and that delays the process, well, at least we can reduce that and mitigate that process on site. And that echoes a lot from the European markets. Sebastian was involved in one of the first 12 stories. I did a 9-story in London, Dalston Lane, and the Cube, which were designed to be more social and affordable housing, because the build system of choice was cheaper than concrete and with much reduced labour on site. So there's got to be significant advantages. Putting aside the carbon credentials of the embodied energy that's already within the wood, it's also about achieving a reduction in the operational energy in the lifetime of the building. So building over 25 years using passive house type construction standards, and this is where mass timber really brings that to the fore, whether it's in the wall or it's in the floor construction, making the building much more airtight significantly reduces the amount of energy consumption needed to keep the building cooler in the summer or warmer in the winter. It's all the sort of the byproducts we get from that. So putting the eco credentials and the biophilia issues, it will start to become a much more acceptable building medium. We just need predominantly the general contractors to embrace that and stop being too traditionalists, and appreciating that when you look at the cost of construction, it is holistically cheaper to use more prefabricated off-site solutions, be it flat pack 2D or be it 3D volumetric. So we can deliver. And in terms of the lack of lumber is not necessarily a lack of lumber. We have an abundance of it, especially in Pacific Northwest. It's more a case of the fibre costs. And right now we've got some headwinds coming in the economy, and therefore we're starting to see stability in the North American lumber costs. Yes, there's been a great demand on the Europeans to bring over the timber because the dollar's relatively strong against all currencies, and fibre costs are low in Europe, but that eventually in time will address the balance. So we have the local resource in Pacific Northwest to service that market all over continental North America. Sebastian?
I'm really grateful to be part of that conversation, and being in the mass timber industry for the past 15 years, both in Europe and the United States, is a super exciting thing to be part of, and really great development to see, and to see folks embrace the idea of mass timber in all sorts of areas, and through politics, through developers, manufacturers, engineering community, architectural community. So that's a great thing to see. I'm also fortunate to work for the oldest CLT manufacturer and one of the largest guns in the industry. With over 40,000 projects, we have seen a lot of different applications for CLT. So any opportunity in CLT construction is the way forward, because what are we doing? We are building sustainable structures, which is fantastic. And we always have to consider it's not just the sustainability, it's also the quality of construction, which really is important. Like especially in social housing, people need safe places, good quality places to live in, and CLT ticks all those boxes. And especially social housing is an interesting topic to touch on, because there is so much opportunity. For example, Syrian refugee crisis in Germany. We really had to get quick accommodation for a lot of people coming into the country. Mass timber was the answer. Developments and housing was quickly established, quickly built. As Nick mentioned rightfully, offsite manufacturing is key in that game to quickly develop and execute projects. So that's really important. Student accommodations is another great example of modular building, and at the same time we have the similar issues in Europe with we can't extend our cities anymore. Like urban growth is not possible, so we have to look into solutions to go up, to build on top of existing structures, on top of maybe post-World War II structures, and timber is the answer for those structures. And I'm just thinking about a project we provided in Frankfurt in Germany, where we built 2 stories modular structures on top of 4 stories existing buildings, where the inhabitants continued living in the houses while we built 120 units in a matter of 6 weeks. So just kind of a few examples to see the potential of mass timber, the benefits of mass timber, of course, the construction speed, the offsite manufacturing. Ernesto mentioned the lack of labor. CLT is a great material to have the answer. You don't need that much labor on site anymore. That whole exercise shifts into production, and therefore CLT can be a good solution. Of course, there are other materials, and you should use CLT wisely, and it is not the whole salvation and solvation for all problems and challenges, but it certainly is a good material to tackle those issues we all encounter at the moment, and certainly a right step into the direction. And I applaud the team for going this way.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Now we'd like to reflect on the projects we just heard about and the discussion about the new innovations in wood products that have the potential to scale up the development of affordable housing, and come back with the questions let's start with Tamara and Ernesto. Reflecting on your organization's efforts to support culturally specific BIPOC and low-income communities, what actions or services do you consider in making the entire process of creating more affordable housing beneficial to those communities?
Thanks, Greg, for that question. And also just want to kind of touch base on a little bit of things that Sebastian mentioned. So I think sometimes people may not understand how important housing is to economic development and growth for a region. And Sebastian touched on, the social housing aspect of it. That's really important. But there was an article by Urban that really talked about the intersection of housing and upward mobility. And it says where a person lives has significant effect on their ability to achieve holistic upward mobility from poverty. And that is not just about place and any housing. It has to be high quality housing. It has to be housing that makes you feel proud. It has to be something that makes you feel like you can really grow and scale. And so the more we have these opportunities in the modular space where we can have faster production that Ernesto is prototyping, the more we can really see ways where people can see themselves in high quality homes. They can really be able to be a part of something in the future. And then also the connection to sustainable forest practices is really key. It's not something that we want to devastate our forests in order to create housing. We have to have a win-win solution. So how do we think about sustainable forest practices? Oregon Department of Forestry has been really leading this. We have some low quality materials that hasn't been used as much in housing, like ponderosa pine, that has also been connected to wildfire. So how do we think differently about the supply of fiber from wood products that can also have a dual impact of reducing fires in fire impacted communities, using that supply to be repurposed into mass timber and cross-laminated timber, that to be then used into affordable housing and then modular construction, which can actually have faster delivery. So that's kind of the win-win that we're trying to look to support. And that's really the exciting part. So making sure, though, that with all of that, the intentionality of equity is centered throughout every stage of that process is critical. And so one of the things that we put into the grant is that we're creating an equity oversight committee to make sure that every component of the projects, from the university fire testing all the way through the advanced manufacturing delivery, has the deliverable outcomes for quality jobs, as well as making sure that those who have not historically been able to benefit from affordable quality housing, in particular due to other zoning and exclusionary practices, are actually centered into getting the outcomes that we really want to achieve. But one of the other intentionalities around this initiative is to really focus on, there was additional investment, $3 million, to really focus on workforce development, which is in partnership with Portland Community College and Work Systems Inc. and others in the community to ensure that we're centering and connecting programs and opportunities with historically marginalized communities. And I think, as we mentioned, housing is kind of the first foundation. It's not the only step in terms of upward mobility. It's also really the opportunities for business ownership and supporting new ways of innovation in the supply chain that we really see some really great opportunities to create change in our region.
Thank you, Tamara. Let's turn back to Nick and Sebastian. Your experience in Europe really provides us with a model for what the future could look like. And we're curious to know, what are the external factors that play an important role in setting the stage for making industrialized timber construction succeed in delivering homes at a more affordable to average income earners?
I think it's a combination of multiple factors, of multiple players embracing the idea of mass timber, multiple stakeholders having a say in the approach, and of what we see is that the key factors are not necessarily the pricing, but the key is straightforward design, repeatability, and scalability of projects.
Thank you, Sebastian. Nick?
Yeah, I'd absolutely echo that. I mean, I was part of the Katerra journey quite a few years ago, and sort of like Sebastian, I've been in mass timber for coming on nearly 2 decades now, when it all kind of kicked off in Europe and the UK, which would have been sort of early 2000s, mid 2000s. And Katerra were very much on that journey about looking at all forms of offsite technology and repeatability and scale. And I was quite blessed to be asked to return to the States to join Mercer International, who acquired the facility in Spokane, and which is great because it's about bringing scale back to the North American market. And predictability wise, we're all anticipating the next 5 years that the supply chain that's currently available in the US will be stretched because of the demand and increase, not just for CLT, but the fact that there's a big push now for low carbon technologies, and repeatability and scale drives effectively the cost down as well. Every building is unique, yet we reinvent the wheel every single time, and we shouldn't do. Once we have a model that works, we only have to design and draw it once, and then that's where we get, we look at the car industry, automotive industry, that can deliver at scale and at reduced cost, because it's about producing just maybe one or two chassis with a number of variants. And this is where offsite technologies come into their own. We can do it now. The US currently lags Europe by about 12 years in terms of advancements in the use of mass timber and offsite solutions, whether it be 2D, 3D, or a mixture of pod and panel solutions. But because of the transfer of knowledge and the advancements in technology, it means that the US will become much, much more the dominant and sustainable market when it comes to mass timber, because ultimately in North America we have the natural resources, and we grow, and our forests are very much more becoming in line with the acceptance of chain of custody, certified materials. We are growing very, very, very fast in North America. Specifically, I would say down the West Coast is pioneering and pushing from BC down to California. It's exciting times for the use of mass timber, but more so, and North America is not unique, the whole world has a housing crisis for an ever-growing population. And if you look at the history of prefabricated technologies, it was a very active and dominant market post-World War II in Europe, when it had to rebuild housing, and prefabricated technologies was the heart of the success of that. This is just very cyclic, and it's coming round again after nearly 80 years, but we're much, much more advanced now, and we have scale, and thankfully with Mercer acquiring the Katerra facility, it's pushed the best part of 140,000 cube of available commodity back into the marketplace, which is exciting. So yes, let's keep it simple, 1 or 2 models, and then we can really drive it up.
What we are also seeing in Europe at the moment, that there's a great push within decision makers, politicians, to call for a Green Deal, for sustainable construction, for being carbon neutral. There's a big discussion, big political programs being initiated to keep construction carbon neutral, and mass timber certainly ticks all those boxes compared to other building material that consumes quite a lot of energy. So there's a big push, and we also see that lenders and developers actually joining in as they see the benefits of carbon positive construction, and people embracing the idea. Also, there's a new generation of renters asking for those kind of items in terms of sustainability, carbon neutral construction. So there's a push from the younger generation to ask for those kind of structures, which is fantastic, and we are not doomed from the next generation.
I was going to say Europe is more politically driven and socially driven as well, is Europe, for demand for sort of public housing, social housing. I'm seeing similar drivers, but coming out of the developers, because developers are about cost. And concrete is the offending, let's be honest, the offending material, 8% of greenhouse emissions on the planet is down to concrete. We can limit that and mitigate that factor by swapping that material out. I'm dealing with a developer in BC right now who wants to go to 9 stories, but cost is the driver. He's using light gauge load bearing walls with the CLT floor plates. And this is where the beauty of CLT isn't just about being a purist, about everything driven in mass timber. We can adapt to structural steel and light gauge steel. Light gauge steel is a rising on demand market. And therefore what we're doing is we're creating alternative affordable build systems without the need for concrete. And this is where, and I think North America will lead that charge, definitely, especially down West Coast and hybrid solutions, for sure.
What's it going to take to support large-scale development of modular mass timber and modular housing, for that matter, and panels? What's it going to take in the way of community investments and community trade-offs? What are we going to need to do to really support this sector, to really get it to scale up? And why don't we start with Ernesto?
Yeah, so number one, I think is going to require a lot of public investment, and in many levels. Not only investment in terms of, supporting operations like ours, but also investment in supporting other entrepreneurs trying to put together other plants to develop and process and manufacture mass timber, either CLT or mass plywood, MP. Now, right now our suppliers, for either one of these industries in the state of Oregon. So let's keep it right here in Oregon for now. It's really limited. Therefore, it's a monopoly. It is a very scarce resource and suppliers. So all of that is going to be increasing that cost, significantly. So the bottom line is that we need to streamline this process from production, supply chain altogether to consumption. So we also have to have some developers, such as ourselves, we're already using in some of our larger projects as a staple. We're trying to include mass timber as different elements, whether it's for floors, joists, some walls, some structural stuff. It doesn't have to be for the entire building, but the more we promote this technology, the more we promote these products, the more they will be, they are going to be used. If we don't streamline these materials, we will find ourselves with a nascent technology, at least in the United States, that will continue to be very expensive and unaffordable. So my job, at least, as a developer, is to try to include mass timber as much as we can, not only for the mass casitas, modular houses that we're doing with the Port Portland, but for any projects that we do. And currently, Greg, this is not the case. In most buildings that you see, we continue to utilize the old-fashioned, never-evolving stick frame technology. There's nothing wrong with that, but we need to move on. We need to continue growing. That type of lumber requires a lot of old growth, requires large members of wood for us to put together a 2x4, 2x6, 2x10, and then, and so on and so forth. So investment number one, so we can start tipping the industry into a mainstream space. Publicity and promotion of the material, so people feel much more comfortable with using this kind of stuff. Incentives, from the different departments, whether it's the Department of Housing or any other industry, that will enable you to get at least a small tax credit when you are using mass timber, so you can have that incentive to come onto you. And you may not be, developing the most cost-effective buildings at this time, but they will get there if we continue to move in this direction. So those are my 2 cents as to how to streamline this product.
Thank you, Greg and Ernesto. I definitely agree that there is definitely a role for the public sector to play, and that's partly why we did get some of that infusion of federal dollars to help kind of provide that seed investment. But there's also got to be, as I think Ernesto touched on, but really a lot more private investment. And I do think this is the opportunity to see some of the global market trends we're hearing from Europe, but also just came from a trip in Asia, that there's emerging opportunities for investment. But I think we also have to think about while we want to focus on housing, that's not the only solution. We have to make sure that there's kind of a good market portfolio mix that balances commercial and some of the larger scale projects with residential housing so that we have enough demand, and then making sure that we have the right testing with R&D from, like, first of all, Tallwood Design Institute, to make sure that we are being able to expand material use and that we can be able to provide more opportunities. And then I think there's also, again, that market awareness. How do we not only think about the investment from, into the market, industries and innovation and into the supply chain, but also just working with developers, working with the broader workforce and construction industries to see how that they can see this as not as a threat, but as an opportunity to expand what they're doing and in a way that really supports innovation. And I would say the trade-offs, and then I think it's more of, I don't know, so it's a trade-off, but it's kind of emerging focus is really about this is a response for both economic inequalities, but also climate change and climate resilience. And so I think there's going to be more and more of a demand in thinking differently about how do we think about our built environment, and how do we also think about impacts, and how do we do this in a way that is can create speed to market, but also in a way that changes maybe some past practices. And so there is some work to be done around market adoption, but I think if we can address some of the cost, some of the supply aspects and other investment opportunities, I don't see this as going away. I see this as continuing to be kind of the trending way that we do development.
Well, we already have the supply chain in place. We can actually, especially Oregon, Washington, and California, we've got our facility to actually produce a product. What is the next stage in evolution is to create these semi-automated and automated facilities for assembly, almost like having a car factory local to the job site, whereby the CLT can be sent to, cut and shaped and ready for assembly, especially if you're doing more modular construction, where the kit of parts comes into play. So that's where the investment comes in. But it's a relatively low capex. It's about having space, having semi-skilled labour, which is great for the local community, to actually start putting these modules together. And that's the next stage of, if you like, community investments and investment to deliver low-cost housing. Yeah, the supply chain is starting to mature to get itself ready in place. So now it's about putting that investment, and that's no different to any other country, where it's the realization that it's not about shipping big volumes across the United States, and that would make it unaffordable, and shipping fresh air at a huge cost of transport and logistics. It's now about having these local facilities. A lot of the UK modular companies who have been very successful and use Swan Homes. They use CLT as their prefab modular solution, up to 6 stories, and but it's within a small radius of where the job site is, because at the end of the day, these modules can be flat pack built and equipped out, right to facades, right to windows, everything, electrics, water and heating and power, and then just transport within a relatively short distance. So that's the next iterative step in this supply chain. That's where the investment needs to come from.
I think key is education, like from the tree to the building, all along the way, people need to be educated in the use, in how to approach projects, how to manufacture. Like CLT manufacturing requires highly skilled people because it's a highly automated process. So it's an opportunity for folks to develop within the company, to learn new trades, to get educated in that process. Also, the whole planning and delivering process is really key to a successful CLT or mass timber operation. Everyone can buy a CLT plant these days, but it's how you run it efficiently. You still will be challenged with the market and other materials in the market. So running a CLT plant efficiently is key. How to use the material as efficiently as possible. Education in developers, in architects and engineers is also key. They need to know how to use that material. Authorities need to be educated how to permit structures. Like we are quite fortunate in the Pacific Northwest that there's a big effort in making sure mass timber is included in the codes, and I applaud the United States for adopting that that quite early and really streamlining it. But still, most projects are still quite challenging to get through permitting. So there's still a lot of education that's required. We haven't figured everything out as the mass timber industry, of course not, but we are certainly ready to take the next step and make it everyday product and everyday building material. So I think in all steps along the supply chain and in the project line, education, awareness of that product, of that process is key to success.
This has been a great discussion. Are there any other final thoughts for the group?
So as I understand, you're planning a facility in the port of Portland. How is it going to be set up? Of course, the aim is fantastic to cater your needs, but there's also a lot of capacity in that facility. How are you going to use that one?
I'll start with it, and maybe Ernesto can add in. So it's 50 acres that we have to develop. So one of the benefits is that we can have, the vision is to have a large mass timber factory, which we're going to be doing an RFI out soon to find an operator for that. So that can be anyone from Europe, Asia, whoever, or domestically. But in addition to that, we have a few warehouses that we have done some initial development, and so that one Hacienda is using for prototyping, and so that's kind of the initial phase. We're also going to have on site the University of Oregon and Oregon State's acoustic testing lab. So it's kind of like the center of innovation. There's also interest potentially for other factory providers, either that do modular in other areas. So we're open. There's enough opportunity on that site to be truly a housing innovation center. And we know that one factory is not enough, but if this could be a catalyst for the region and for the state and connect the dots with what's happening in Washington State and in Vancouver, BC, we do really see that this could be a cascading opportunity for really scaling production and growth and really connecting some of the dots where we don't have here locally. So that's the opportunity. So it's not just for one partner, it's for multiple partners, but in order to reinforce and support each other. Ernesto, did you want to add anything more about kind of the warehouse space that you're using right now?
Well, I just want to clarify a little bit more about, Sebastian's comment in regards to our needs. The needs that we're trying to address, Sebastian, at least on phase one of our prototypes that we're hoping that will be, replicated over and over again for some time, is the single family home type. So we're going to go for 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom units that will be addressing some accessory dwelling unit needs, within the greater urban Portland metro area. But more than that, some of the capacity issues that we're facing in rural communities in Oregon, and this, and across the Northwest, it's that labor. It's not even lending. Lending comes last, right? If there is labor, if there's a project, people can do it. You will find the money somewhere. Sometimes it's not the right money, sometimes expensive. But when you don't have contractors, when you don't have the right subcontractors, when you don't have developers, when you don't have, this built-in supply chain that many urban centers have, then you have a very serious issue. That very serious issue, you can build anything, you can build in the moon if you want to, but that's not the point. The point is who has the resources to make this happen in a timely manner. So when we are thinking about, who the market might be and probably will be to begin with, is going to be rural communities that are lacking housing, that are lacking that capacity. So when you have a house that can be just plugged in, that capacity that you have to have locally will be minimized to a plumber, an electrician, and the site prep guys, which is pretty much there everywhere. When you are getting into large systems for affordable housing or large systems on mechanical and so on and so forth, that's where you start to face a lot of challenges in those communities. You have to bring them from the urban centers, which increases costs significantly. The other piece is that not only for rural communities that they can order a house and have a house, we also want to ensure that we can be on call and say, you know what, Ernesto, we just lost 20 houses. You know what, Tamara, City of Seattle's calling, we need 50 homes. Can you deliver in a month, for us? We are really stretched with capacity to build housing, and we need some of these units to house the unhoused or to do this and that. So it is emergency response, it is time, it is money, it is capacity alleviation, for some of these locations. A lot of these things are going to come together with this kind of operation. We still have a lot of work to do into understanding how all of these pieces come together when we're mainstreaming the process. But that's exactly where we are right now. We're on the R&D process, not of the house anymore, but on the marketing and also deployment of these houses. So a lot of things to learn, but I'm pretty confident and I have a lot of faith that this is not the solution, but the right solution for this particular moment for some of these issues that we're facing. So that's where we want to go. And finally, we're hoping that this will bring at least a different set of economic development opportunities for employment. And that is one piece that Port Portland is very invested in. Tamara is actually leading that process. And we are super interested in bringing our communities, the Latino community, the Black community, the Asian community, women, to really join these industries. They are so underrepresented. Our learning centers are focusing precisely on that, trying to bring women and minorities to join the tech industry. It is absurd that we don't have enough representation, and these jobs are well-paid jobs. So there's a number of things. For me, mass timber and housing are just the tools for us to do all of this. They are not the end.
I was going to say, these facilities you are setting up, are these for doing the just pure assembly of the modular components? So the supply chain, whether it's KLH or whether it's Mercer, are we supplying into your facilities where you're going to be doing the assembly of the modular construction? You are the next iterative stage in the evolution towards offsite modular but using mass timber?
I think it's a mix. I don't know if we have the exact answer yet because we're in the early stages of doing the business planning, but my understanding is more of the both the R&D and the actual manufacturing development, but then also having some of the panelized aspects there so that it can be ready to go out to production. And I think, Ernesto mentioned single family homes, but I think we're also eventually looking into what are some of the opportunities for multifamily, multi-story, modular opportunities. So really looking at all the innovation pieces. And then I think there's opportunities to really connect this with other sustainable housing solutions, such as like energy products, and all of those other things. But that's where we think we can learn a lot from where Europe has been ahead and what project has worked. And then also where there's other markets that have a lot of density, like in Asia, and how they've been able to apply some of this technology and use. But we have also learned that without having additional fire testing and other things, then there's constraints globally in building codes. And so I think that's also something that we're testing, and that's what the prototypes are used to be testing. So I'd say is, I think all of those things are on the table, but what that perfect model looks like, we have design thoughts and ideas, but we don't yet have the developers in place or the factory owners in place, but that is coming very soon.
No, absolutely. Tamara, you're spot on. It's, in the UK has been quite a leading light in volumetric construction, and it's used all forms, whether it's been mass timber, timber frame, light gauge steel, and especially if you're going to focus on single family homes. I was lucky a few weeks ago to visit the UK's largest volumetric housing provider, and that was at scale, at a significant scale. And but that takes a lot of capex investment, and all they were doing was effectively, they were a car factory. They were assembling the components on a production line, to take it out to fully finished. Where I probably see more success, and more so in Europe, when I start seeing a combination of using flat pack. When I call it flat pack, it is pure IKEA flat pack technology, where maybe the walls are completely pre-assembled. There's through wall solutions with windows in panels, insulation, facade, and and all the finishes. But the volumetric component is more limited to maybe the bathroom pods or the kitchen pods, and we've seen a lot coming out. And one of the industry leaders was Vastins into IKEA Hospitality, developing the Moxie Hotel, and hotels and student accommodation often offer repeatability and symmetric, continuity, and therefore you can scale up. And I went to Vastin's assembly facility in Milan, where they used a mixture of 2D and 3D coming together, which I am seeing other CLT manufacturers taking that forward into Europe. And it is about creating, not just pioneering, but market maturity as well. It's about the right material in the right place, and what makes sense. And recently in the UK, I was dealing with the UK's largest care home provider, and we got down to an argument on windows in panels. They said, right, it costs us £100 to put a window in panel on a construction site, so we'll give you £100 to do it off-site. And then we did the costings, and we said, well, actually, it's going to cost £150. And that's where the economies of scale come in, that fine balance between how much can you do in an off-site assembly compared to how much the traditional is prepared to let go of what the cost model looks like. And, the numbers really need to be finited holistically to truly gain the benefits of where modularization and offsite really comes into its own. The simple answer is there's no simple answer. But it's what is available to you, in proximity of where you want to construct.
One of the things, the opportunity I'm hoping the World Forestry with this program and everything is, we're in discovery mode right now. I mean, yes, we have this infusion, we have some really great best concepts, but now we want to go and maybe, collect your resources, do field study tours, bring, potential workers and curriculum, because that's what we really need to discover to get it right, and then hopefully make global market change. Sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to add that in. Is this is the exciting part of how can we get it better globally to work together, and then where are those great case studies so that we can learn from each other.
And it's also a journey. Like me working for the oldest mass timber or CLT producer in the world. Like those three gentlemen that started the whole operation back in the 90s, they had no idea what was coming out of the whole thing. They were initially producing CLT for the next valley, right a few miles down the road, and see where we have come now. Like we are building high rises out of mass timber. Mass timber is used in all sorts of construction types and building types. Like we always think we have seen it all. We are doing 1,000 projects a year, and still everything is every project is different.
The plan is to change the world, right? So that's it.
We're here to leave legacies, not just pioneer. We're here to leave a legacy for the next generation to take it to another level.
I just want to thank everybody for participating today. This has really been a great discussion. And I think that we've learned a lot. We've heard about a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities, both in the technical side and also on the social side. The thing that impresses me the most is that there are a lot of social issues that need to be addressed if we're going to be successful in really scaling up mass timber and modular housing. So thank you very much for that. I look forward to future opportunities to delve into some of these issues in more detail. I think while we've covered a lot of ground today, we've really scratched the surface in terms of the kinds of discussions we need to have, particularly around the social issues that surround mass timber and modular housing.